In chapter 6, we talk about structures and institutions. What we mean when we talk about structures and institutions is the everyday, invisible and taken for granted ways in which our society and our interactions with each other are organised. So when we talk about structures, what we mean are the invisible frameworks which exist in our social world to organise the interactions that we have with each other. So social class and gender relations are good examples of social structures. We know they're there. We know they organise our interactions with each other, but we can't see them, we can't touch them. In this chapter, we take what we call a structural perspective, which argues that these social structures, which we can't see or touch, exist outside of us, but constrain us or funnel us into particular ways of behaving in society in order to be able to behave appropriately in the particular society that we live in and to interact with people in appropriate ways. When we think about institutions, what we're talking about is the formal and informal rules of the game which support the broader structures of society. When we think about the example of driving, we might think about the formal institutions which govern our behaviour on the road. So the speed limit, which makes us go at a particular speed, and the placement of the stop signs, which force us to stop in particular places that we might not want to stop in, but ultimately they keep everything functioning, they keep everybody safe on the roads. They're there for a purpose and they formally teach us the rules of the game of driving. This is in contrast to informal institutions which aren't upheld or enshrined by law, but which are the cultural norms and expectations and behaviours which teach us to interact with each other appropriately in society. So again, let's think of the example of driving. When we drive and somebody lets us out at a give way sign, we wave our hand and we say thank you. That's not enshrined in law. We don't have to do that, but we take that on as an informal behaviour in order to behave appropriately on the roads and to have appropriate interactions with other road users. To understand the ways in which these structures and institutions shape our experiences of the social world, we take 4 particular examples of social institutions. We look at the family, we look at education, we look at the media, and we look at work. And we look at the ways in which each of these institutions is culturally and historically located. So the idea of family isn't the same across all cultures, it isn't the same across all countries and all historical periods. When we think about the family now, for example, we very much think of the nuclear unit of the family, which tends to be prevalent in terms of representations of the family. But this is really quite a recent invention. If we think before industrialisation, people actually lived in much larger family groups with cousins, aunties, uncles, grandparents, all living under the same roof and working together, which isn't what we would recognise now as being family. And that hasn't spontaneously changed. That's changed because technology and the economy and politics and our culture in general has changed and shaped the individual interactions that we have with the closest people to us, our family. And the idea of what we mean by family continues to evolve. So we tend to think of family as quite a private affair. It's us, or our parents, or our children. But actually what we mean by family is publicly and politically constructed. So, for example, if we choose to have children, when we choose to have children, how we choose to have children, and with whom we choose to have children aren't all private decisions that we make. These are all mediated by wider political, technological, social and economic questions about what the right thing to do is. In sociology, we deconstruct this idea of the right way to be a member of a family and really locate this idea of a family in general within its very social and cultural and historical context. In summary then, chapter 6 looks at the effect that our social institutions have on our individual interactions with wider society, with our work, with our families, with the media and with the education that we receive and in some cases that we give.